I'm hoping to get to know my local flora this year in a more deep and meaningful way. I tend to find things stay with me if I do something practical to learn. I could simply go outside and learn to identify the habitat and the flora of my local park, but I think it would take it a little bit deeper to see what colours I can create using them as natural dyes. It feels like connecting both my environment and textile crafts together is a perfect woven pairing. I've been reading Vickery's Folk Flora, and I loved the saying about fishing an Alder. When the bud of the awl is as big as a trout's eye, then that fish is in season on the River Wye. It's lovely to see that if we focus and pay attention to what nature is saying, it will give back to us in such a way. In Celtic mythology, when Deirdre of the Sorrows eloped with Naoise, they fled to escape the wrath of King Conchobar, to whom Deirdre had been betrothed. They hid from the king's pursuing warriors in Alderwoods, where they eventually settled. It seems that Alder lends itself to themes of hiding and secrecy, both in terms of how we use the amazing resource and how we speak about it in our stories. This month I'm looking at Alder, using the cones and catkins. I've noticed so many of them on my walks and even on the way to the high street to get food supplies. I know they're rich in tannins, and alder cones are something I find myself frequently picking up off the ground throughout the year. I find myself apologising to my husband from time to time for leaving them randomly around the house. As for anything you're taking from the land, harvest responsibly, so take only what you need and leave enough for the wildlife or plant regeneration. Some plants might be protected or require permission to harvest, so it's useful to get to know your local regulations. Try and enact seasonal abundance, focus on what's plentiful to minimise your impact. Maybe not always picking up the first plant you see. Alders are a deciduous tree and have been used for dyeing for centuries, and they seem to offer some really interesting colours. The bark in particular can create various shades of brown, from pale yellows to deepish red browns, depending on how it's processed. Historically, alder bark was used by indigenous peoples, especially in the Pacific Northwest of North America, to dye fabrics, wool, and other materials. In Europe, alder was commonly used for dyeing textiles during medieval times. These natural dyes were a big part of daily life, and they were often used in making clothing and ceremonial garments, and the wood was even used for clog making. From at least the Bronze Age, alder has been used as a building material. In Scotland, alder was used as the base for crannogs, wooden strongholds on Scottish lochs. And in Italy, most of Venice is built on piles of alder. When it's constantly underwater, it will harden like stone. Alder trees thrive in wet lowland habitats like riverbanks, marshes, and wetlands. So if you're hiking near one of these areas, it's a good chance you might spot one. They're beneficial to the environment because they're nitrogen-fixing trees, which helps improve the quality of soil for the other plants around them. On my first gathering, I collected about 71 grams, and then a day or two later the sun came out and I couldn't resist going on another walk. I happened to spot a whole new bunch of alder trees that were just asking to give me a little extra gift to see if I could get a richer colour. I ended up gathering about 330 grams of cones and catkins with a few twigs in there for good measure. I let them soak for a week, and I think it ended up being about 8 days as we had been so busy. I extracted the dye with heat by simmering for about an hour and then left it overnight while I soaked the yarn ready for its dye bath. I chose to dye a little more mohair. I'd like to get some natural wool for this purpose, but I'm using what I have, and I always enjoy how mohair and silk take dye. I also decided to be a little brave and try a yak silk blend, as I love how deep the natural colour of the yak fibre is already. 150 grams of mohair, 100 grams of yak silk. Once the dye was extracted, the plant stuff sieved and the yarn fully soaked, I added the yarn to the dye pot and simmered it once more for about an hour. I then left it to cool overnight. I chose not to use a mordant, knowing that the dye is basically tannins. It should hold well enough, and I wanted to see the colour as is, rather than modified at this point. After doing a little further reading, I decided to re-simmer the cones and catkins to see if I could extract more colour for a secondary dye batch. The next morning, rather than giving it a full wash, I decided to rinse the yarn and spin dry it rather than get out too much of the excess dye, with the hope that if I let it set for a few days, it might make the colour have a little bit more longevity and a little bit stronger. When I was finished with the dye pot, I gave the leftover liquid to the plants that like acidic soil, in particular the hydrangea and the spider plants, who are both quite thirsty. Overall, I'm really happy with this colour, in particular on the yak silk, the first batch. It's come out just, to me, like the most perfect bronze, and I think I have an idea for the project. I'm torn slightly because I've wanted to make a Bronze Age t-shirt for quite some time, and I feel like a yak silk one would bring a modern twist on a historic item, but yak and silk does seem a little bit luxurious. What do you think? Otherwise, I might use one skein for making a little top for the summer and spring, and pass the second skein on. The secondary dye bath wasn't as strong in colour as the first, which was very expected, but I am quite pleased with the colour. It's subtle and I think I might over dye it still, maybe even next month with whatever dye matter we choose. And it did mean that there was more acidic water for the plants. I'm not quite sure what I'll do with the mohair yet, and if you are interested and you would like to take some off my hands, please do reach out. It's quite nice to be able to share these things. But in the meantime, I'm so pleased with this. I'm really enjoying this project, and it definitely is making me pay more attention when I'm out and making me feel a bit more connected, like I'm naturalizing to this environment rather than feeling completely at home in the place where I was born. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this little natural dyeing adventure, and I hope to see you again very soon. Don't forget to love each other.